So yes, thank you so much to the Nautical Archaeology Society for the invitation to present this webinar, and a special thanks to the Honor Frost Foundation for making this possible and supporting all the research that's associated with the Punic Ship, and not only in the last few decades, but also today and in the future. And I also wanted to send out a thanks to our colleagues, Giulia Boetto, Matt Polakowski, and Elena Flavia Castagnino Bedlinghieri. Unfortunately, they couldn't be with us today, but I thank them for trusting us to share aspects of their research here. So I'm going to give you an illustration of the history of the Punic ship discovery that was made 50 years ago. Then Lauren will take over and illustrate current research on the Punic ship display and preservation and aspects of public outreach related to the Punic ship. And then I will come back with a short presentation of a project I've been working on with Elena Flavia on an unfinished book manuscript written by Honor Frost that we found in her archives. It's a memoir travelogue about the Punic ship project. So let me get to the next slide. That would be my intention. Okay, let's see if this works. Here we go. Okay, so who is Honor Frost? Well, a lot has been written about her recently, but the important thing to remember about Honor is that really she was a true pioneer in underwater archaeologist and one of the first women in the field. She had a great impact on research, in particular on anchors, which she pioneered. She did considerable research on harbors and coastal archaeology, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean. And her experience working on shipwrecks began actually in southern France in the early 1950s. And she really is recognized for bringing a multidisciplinary approach and a very keen eye to detail on all the types of research that she has, that she's known for. So about the Punic ship, we can describe it as a fast-oared long ship. It is well known, at least in the maritime archaeology field, for being unique in several different aspects. One of which is that it is not a cargo ship, which is typical of ancient vessels found in the Mediterranean. It's actually a galley built for speed, narrow and long. But so the Punic ship project, it's been described as the greatest venture of Honor's life. And if you consider her archives in Southampton, about half the material in the archives actually are related to the Punic ship project. So it's a unique ancient vessel discovered in 1971 in August. It consists of a well-preserved portion of a 3rd century BC galley. It includes shipwrights marks, that's what's extraordinary, including Punic lettering, which gives an idea of who actually built the ship, first time these were found. There's evidence of prefabrication, which we knew about from ancient sources, but this seems to be the first archaeological evidence for prefabrication of ancient ships. And the archaeological and circumstantial evidence suggests that it was likely some kind of a military vessel. You have to be careful with the terminology, but it is a vessel built for speed, and the circumstances suggest that it was associated with a military venture. So here we are in, hopefully you can see my cursor. Marsala is at the western tip of Sicily. That's where the ship was found. Here is a detail that shows the western tip. Here again is Marsala. And I'm just going to point out some sites so that you can keep in mind for the other parts of the talk. This is the lagoon of Marsala. The Punic ship was found right off this tip, Punta Scario. A lot of times you read about it being found in a lagoon. That's not correct. It was found here. This is the island of Mozia, which I'll mention in a moment. And what's interesting is that there's a connection, as you'll see, with the sea battle that took place off the Egadi Islands, right around here. This discovery that I can point this out to you is fairly recent. The last 10, 15 years of research has located the place of the Egadi battle. So if the Egadi battle between the Carthaginians and the Romans took place in 241 BC, and it's thought that perhaps this vessel escaped the battle and came to grief here, trying to find safety in Marsala, Lilybaeum, ancient Lilybaeum, the Carthaginian city there. And the sea battle of the Punic War, the sea battle ended the First Punic War and gave control of this area of Sicily and eventually of the Mediterranean to the Romans. So it's a very important historical battle. So to find a vessel that might have a affiliation, a connection to it is rather extraordinary. So the discovery happened in this way. It was not a straight path. In 1969, Honor Frost came to Sicily to visit her friend and colleague, archaeologist Gérard Capitaine, and they had intended to go to Western Sicily to investigate a site on the island of Mozia within the lagoon of Marsala, located right here. But it turned out that they weren't able to meet right away with the people that they needed to work with, and instead they were approached by Eduardo Lipari, the bailiff of Mozia, saying, we have just had news that some ancient ship timbers were found nearby. As you're here, would you like to come and take a look at them? And so they did, and they went to look at this area. If you can remember the lagoon, this is the northern part of the lagoon. Here's the lagoon, and there's Mozia. And this is the area where some unusual ship timbers were found by a sand dredger, dredging sand to make glass bottles for the local wine industry, right? Marsala is famous for its wine. So a number of areas of ship timbers were found here, and they were quite intrigued. And one in particular helped them focus their attention. They said, okay, look, there's a cargo ship that has a cargo of tiles, an ancient Roman vessel, rather typical. You could see some of the timber, rather typical Roman construction. Let's put in a permit to explore this so-called tile wreck. That's what they nicknamed it. So at the fall of 1969, they put in a permit. They put in a request for a permit to investigate further with the Soprintendenza alle Antichità under Professor Vincenzo Tusa, Western Sicily. And Prost was made director for this project that was going to happen the following summer in 1970. She was made the director under the auspices of the British School at Rome. But when they returned the following summer, this ship had disappeared under the sands because movement is very, movement of sands is very unpredictable and can really change with weather. So they were in a quandary. There they were with their permit. What were they going to do? So they decided to begin surveying the area. They knew that there were other ship remains there. I should just say this image comes from a couple of years later when the sands shifted again and revealed that tile wreck again. So they did go back to it, but for the first season of work there, they began just looking at isolated finds, mostly piles of tufa blocks and other ballast stones. Amongst the ballast stones, some artifacts, but quite random. Very little evidence, if any, no evidence really for cargo ships. In other words, a pile of cargo that would mark the location of a shipwreck itself. So instead, they found other items that again began to point, not again, but they began to point to some kind of area of military significance. In other words, they found an anchor, a very unusual type of anchor with a removable lead stock, with some of the timber surviving. They found loads and loads of metal concretions, some of which they were able to make molds from. And this is an example of a spearhead, so a weapon that was found there. They also found a very unusual object, which Honor Frost interpreted as possibly a so-called corvus, which is a device. Here you can see in an 18th century illustration, something that was known from ancient literature to have been used by the Romans as a type of let's call it a grappling hook that would allow them to attach themselves to the enemy vessel and then climb on and fight directly on the enemy vessel. So it's not quite clear what this was, but a number of strange items that certainly intrigued them. And they sort of nicknamed one area the anchor and spear wreck. And here you can see, first of all, that it was fairly shallow. This is just a sketch, but here they are doing more detailed survey on the anchor and spear wreck. So this is the second season, 1971, and Honor really was connected to a lot of different people, and also just her work inspired other people to approach her. And in this summer, in July, mid-July, a very interesting man named Harold Edgerton from MIT came to visit her because he wanted to field test his sonar instruments. Now, you've heard from other presentations in this series about the importance of sonar tools, side scan sonar, to survey and locate items that could be of interest to then explore further, let's say with divers, at least in shallow water. So here's Professor Edgerton with Honor looking at a readout of one of his surveys. And in fact, he didn't end up finding anything too significant. One area that was a potential shipwreck site, but in terms of the history of maritime archaeology, very interesting that he was coming to field test his sonar tools in 1971 in Western Sicily. So very interesting. So look at this date, July 12th, all right? Interesting. And he left after 2 days. And this guy turns out to have been the person who made everything possible with the discovery, because the discovery happened 3 weeks later. If only Harold Edgerton had still been there, he could have surveyed this new discovery with his sonar instruments. But what happened instead was they continued their usual surveying methods using line surveying. And the gentleman I pointed out, David Singmaster, went off of the formal survey for a moment and came across this piece of timber jutting out of the sand, very strange looking, called Honor over. She was very frustrated because he was disturbing the method of this survey. But as soon as she came to look carefully, she saw this was something extraordinary. So in this picture, you can really see the quality of the timber. It was very, very well preserved. You can see traces of lead sheathing, which was to protect the ancient timber from shipworm. You can see these copper alloy nails, and she knew right away something here was important to be investigated. And here's an initial sketch that shows what they were looking at here is part of the stern of the back end of the vessel, this part here. And very, very soon they cleared an area of timbers, and they noticed again 2 areas of ballast on either side of what is, let's say, the spine of the vessel. So here's David at the base camp, very nice guy, photographer. And in fact, the site discovered was named after him, the Singmaster site, as you can see from this, again, a sketch. It's not to scale, but it gives you a sense of ballast piles on either side, Now we're looking the other direction, the stern end. And here also are lots and lots of ballast stones, and you begin to get a sense the keel is going to be here. It's a little bit distorted, this image, but still it's nice, I think, to see these hand sketches. And in fact, I mean, a lot of the material I'm showing you now is from Honor's archives, not necessarily published images, but actually showing work in progress and you know, the process of discovery itself. So here's another sketch. Again, it's dirty because it was being used on site, and it gives you a sense of the scatter of cultural remains that were underwater. Here's a baseline, 350 meters. You get a sense. Here's the coast shore, the edge of the coast. Here's the area where they were working initially on that anchor and spearhead wreck. This later on, they recovered the location of that tile wreck. There's all sorts of other little bits and pieces of wrecks elsewhere, but here's the Egerton wreck, the wreck that Egerton located with his sub-bottom profiler. And here is the Singmaster site, just to give you a sense of the spread of the locations. So right away, Honor wrote a request to have a permit for an emergency excavation of what clearly was a very interesting shipwreck. And the next 4 years, from 1971 to 1974, were excavation seasons. And these images give you a little bit of a sense of what the environment was like. Here you can see really quite shallow. Some parts of the site were maybe 1.5 meters. What would that be, 9 feet? Other parts are maybe 2 meters high. Here you get a sense of some of the equipment that was needed in areas where sand really did pile up, as you can see here. Other times areas were fairly clear and clean for work. But again, you get a sense from the coast looking towards where the sand, where the dredger is located right above the site. And this is a small boat that carried the airlift. And so excavating and recording, well, by this time, we're early 70s, some techniques, of course, had already been developed. It had been about 10 years or so since scientific excavation underwater had been formalized at Cape Delidonia in Turkey, the site where Honor worked also. But just to give you a sense, she also did innovate on with certain methods. So she devised a sort of a contour comb that you can see on deck that was used to, actually record the curvature of the hull. Look also, by the way, at the color of this wood. It's very, very fresh looking. Everything is extremely well preserved. So this is the contour comb. This is a flexi curve that was also used to repeat that curvature. Everything she was going to record what was on the sea bottom, knowing that as soon as you start excavating, the conditions change. Safety, the preservation safety of materials can begin to deteriorate. And here we see the diver actually making one-to-one drawings of the timbers directly on site. And this distribution map, again, you get a sense, here is the stern, the first part that was found. Essentially what we have is about 10 meters, 30 feet roughly, of hull that had been preserved. Here's the keel, about 4 strakes, 4 layers of planks had survived on one side, 16 strakes on the other. The distribution of finds was helpful to get a sense of the configuration of the ship itself. So here you see a kitchen area and also kitchen finds here. These arrows also suggest once the ship had settled, well, once it had wrecked, there are processes that obviously move items around. So there's a lot of interpretation to be made in terms of where items were originally on the wreck. And here you can get just a very basic sense if you're looking a cross section here. Here's just this short part of the vessel. she estimated how long the vessel might have been. See this sharp angle? It looks like it was probably wrecked as a result of a violent impact, jammed into the seabed. That's important in later on. And here you see the narrow part of the vessel, the wider part of the vessel, how the ballast would have perhaps tumbled out from the site itself. And the plan of the hull, again, a little bit more in detail. The ship timbers were mostly, the planking and the keel were pine. Some maple was used in the frames, the transversal members, floor timbers, and half frames. There was also part of a whale that was found. One part actually was found not far from the ship, and another part was found on the beach 50 meters away, but related to the ship. The whales were made of oak. And another aspect that's quite interesting is that within the cavity of the keel, a lot of material, a lot of wood material, wood shavings were found that were analyzed, and it seems that they might well be part of the superstructure of the vessel, and because they're not the typical types of timber of wood that one would use in the hull itself. So in terms of the hull assembly, it's estimated, it's understood that the first 11 planks were on either side of the keel, were assembled edge to edge. Then the floor timbers, the transversal timbers, were inserted, and then higher strakes were placed on. So here we're talking higher strakes up here. They were placed as a unit. They had already been attached to themselves. So here's an example of the prefabrication. They were attached up here. Then more frames were added. So it's a fairly light vessel. There's no ceiling covering the basic skin of the vessel. And also I'll show you images of a lot of putty was found across the site, which was used to seat and steady the timbers during the process of building. A lot of information was derived about the site regarding the process of building. Here's some good images that show you the type of edge joinery. You've heard perhaps of mortise and tenon joinery, or tongue and groove. Here we're looking at the edge of a plank. So here are the mortises, the holes within which you would have tenons that would link this plank to the plank next to it. Very, very well preserved. And this is an image that shows after preservation, but at least you get a sense. Here's the tenon that would have fit into each of the two planks. And the mortises and the tenons were fixed in place with wooden timbers, with wooden pegs, pardon me. And this is important in terms of the history of the development of shipbuilding technology, to be able to notice these kinds of features. And by the way, notice here, this is a piece of rope, give you a sense of how well preserved it was. And it's preserved well because all of this wood and all of these organics were had been well protected under sand, no oxygen, no light, and that allowed them to survive for a long time. So the feature I mentioned at the beginning, the fact that this vessel had marks, shipwrights marks, the fact that Honor and her team were careful enough, had acute enough observational skills to notice that there were these marks. Some were simply guidelines indicating where nails were to be driven in or mortises cut. Here's another guideline you can see along the length of the keel. We're looking into the to the top of the keel. But in addition to these kinds of marks, there were some others that pretty quickly Honor recognized as letters. And so some of these marks were scored, cut, some of them were painted. And it turns out that, in fact, these were Punic letters. And she called right away a specialist, Professor Paul Johnston, an epigraphist from Aberdeen University, who came to examine what what was going on. The point that's really phenomenal is that it's the first time, with 1971, 1972, the first time that such marks had been ever seen on an ancient ship. Not necessarily that they were the only ones, but it was the first time that they had been recognized and identified. So it's an example of how honor really worked carefully. So Johnston was able to recreate the building sequence of the hull based also on the locations of some of these letters. Here you see some marks here. We're looking at sort of the side here. Again, is the stern part of the stern post, and here's part of the keel. Unfortunately, as they were excavating, a lot of these letters that were painted on began to disappear. They began to fade away. There was apparently a series of alphabetical sequences that were actually set out along the port face of the keel, repeated inside the hull, where each letter was marking the location of one of the skeletal timbers, one of the timbers that go across the width of the vessel. Very, very, very interesting, unique, of course. And here we see, as part of the display of the ship, because a lot of these signs faded, some photography was accomplished underwater, but it really was quite difficult. So some of the marks Johnson was able to record before they disappeared completely, but on the current display you actually have I guess it's a piece of plexiglass or something that's placed on top of the timber where originally these are the signs that would have been seen by the excavators. So quite interesting indeed. So some other features of this vessel are that it was sheathed in lead. I mentioned that earlier, to protect from shipworms. And this is an interesting thing if we're talking about this being a long, narrow vessel built for speed. Why would you have lead sheathing, which makes it a heavier vessel? It's a little bit, you're always going back and forth between ideal of having a vessel for capacity or having a vessel that's more designed for speed. But it's one of the many questions that's still in discussion. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the lead sheathing did survive and was quite interesting in and of itself. Another feature that has caused or has provoked lots of discussion, is that at the turn of the bilge here, here's the water line. It's just a sketch, it's not precise, but you may be able to see that the smooth planking becomes unsmooth. It becomes kind of corrugated. And here's a detail of that. So this was interpreted by Honor perhaps as being the function of this being to deflect spray from the water as the ship moved in the water. Again, to increase its speed capacity. Other interpretations are that maybe it was more likely simply related to strengthening the keel, strengthening the hull in a part of the vessel that was more susceptible to strain. So it's one of those discussions of nautical archaeology, of naval architecture that's very lots of discussions. And here is an image that you can see parts of these pieces of putty that I said were liberally strewn across the interior of the vessel. And they were apparently used to hold pieces of timber during the process of construction. And here you can see this wiggle mark. It's probably not exactly a letter, but maybe it's a mark, or maybe it's just a drip of paint. But something that, again, is pretty remarkable for the preservation that you can see this element. And a cross section, or let's say stratigraphic representation of the vessel, again, I mentioned earlier that Honor noticed really the angle at which this keel was, let's say, jammed into the seabed. Again, you can see the shallowness of the water. This is the top, this is the water surface. And she really did do a very careful analysis of the materials within the vessel and also underneath in order to help her with the analyses of the story of this vessel itself. And in terms of what was found on the ship, I said there was no precise cargo per se, really only piles of ballast stones and, yes, amphoras. These are the two-handled storage jars that are well known from antiquity. Quite a mixture, not a typical consignment of identical amphoras, but quite a mixture, Greco-Italic and also Punic from the Carthaginian area. Pottery was a mixture of fineware, coarseware, mostly Roman type. And here's an example of fine conservation where you actually have the lid of the amphora still preserved. And then organic materials, very well preserved organics. This is an example of a broom that survived so well. Here you see remains of a basket. Amongst all the grunge of organics, there were these white, light-colored stems that they did not recognize right away what they were, but eventually the Kew Gardens in London identified them as cannabis sativa stems that Honor Frost interpreted as maybe being used for tea for the Phoenician sailors on board. You've got seeds and rope and also bone. And part of the process of recording and conserving information from this vessel is that she had plaster casts made of some of the elements of the ship. Because knowing also that conservation may well have altered the nature of the timber, discoloration, maybe distortion, because still it's a period of experimentation with conservation. And so these are one-to-one replicas that were painted also with the location of some of the shipwright signs. And she had a small exhibit put on for local Marsalese school children. And today you can see these plaster casts at the winery of the Cantine Pellegrino in Marsala that belonged to Pietro Alagna, his family, who I'll mention in just a minute. So I see I'm going a little on here. I'll try to be fast. So conservation processes took place over a number of years. Here's an image of Dr. Romano Pietro Alagna, who was a chemist by training, but in the winery business, he was crucial to Honor's project to guarantee the facilities to conduct the conservation treatments of these timbers over time. And the thing that's quite interesting is she was able to collaborate with Michael Katsev of the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, who had been just in recent years conserving a well-preserved hull off the north coast of Cyprus, where he had used this water-soluble wax called peg, which is something used that you imbue, soaking over time, the timbers get imbued with this material and get preserved. But it was still experimental at that time, depending on the quality of the timber, how well it might absorb this peg material or not. So there's very interesting discussions about that as well. The next item that I have to bring up, which is very interesting, is that in the fourth season, 1973, they first discovered, with the shifting sands and so on, several different sites, including one that was nicknamed the sister ship, because in fact, it revealed almost right away that it also had Punic lettering, like the Punic ship. So that it was again a vessel that had no cargo, a ballast of hard clay, but only a very preliminary survey was carried out, some sampling, and what its feature, here you see some of the frames coming up, but the feature that was quite extraordinary was the part of the prow, which was ram-like, like a beaker type, a beaked ram is how Honor described it. And this was used in the efforts of reconstruction of the vessel, of the Punic ship, because there was a cultural relation between them. If the Punic ship had the aft end of the vessel, this provided some material to create the hypothesis of what the forward end of the vessel might have been like, some kind of a prow with, could this be offensive? We don't know. Could it maybe be simply a cutwater to assist in navigation? So quickly, you know, in terms of dating the vessel, the pottery typology is pretty broad. The dunnage, some of the organic materials that were used to protect the hull, they were carbon-14 dated to 235 plus or minus 65 BC. So again, middle of the 3rd century. The epigraphy was dated to between 300 and 250 BC. So again, we're narrowing down towards, let's say, the middle half of the 3rd century. And the archaeological context and the other related, the finds related to the environment around this vessel really had Honor point to this sea battle of 241 BC as the event when this vessel came to grief. And in terms of its origins, very quickly, there are provenance studies that can be made on the ballast-stones. The pottery is pretty straightforward. The shipwrights marks that are Punic, the timber and the dunnage. And the information is not entirely pristinely clear. Some items point to North Africa, some items point to West Africa for, West Sicily for origin. But it's a conversation also in terms of the shipwrights that they may well have been Punic shipwrights, but were they actually from the Carthaginian side, or did they actually work with Romans somewhere else? And in terms of the function of this vessel, I think it's definitely, no question, it's a seagoing galley. The only one found to date in the ancient world. Some galleys have been found in river systems, so the construction would be different, but this remains 50 years on the only seagoing galley found. So eventually this vessel was housed in a warehouse, a former winery warehouse at Capobeo. In 1978, it was reconstructed, but the building itself was not in ideal conditions. I'll be mentioning that in a minute. So for a number of years, the hull was protected under a tent to try to maintain environmental stability. Nowadays, this is what you see, is a fantastic exhibit of the vessel. The building is completely restored, of course, and it is a site that is definitely well worth visiting. Okay, I think now I can turn it over to Lauren. Very, very fast run through the discovery of this vessel. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Brilliant. I'm going to hand over to Lauren then, so she can share her. Oh, look at that, Lauren, like a dream. Okay, Lauren, I can see your slides, no problem at all. Over to you.
Great, thank you, Claire. It's such a fascinating site, and I find it so remarkable that for a site that was in just a couple of meters of water, you know, in really dynamic shifting sands that it was so well preserved. So for those of you that don't know, I work for the Honor Frost Foundation. It was founded in 2011. So the Foundation's mission is to promote the advancement and research, including publication of maritime archaeology. We've got a particular focus, but not an exclusive focus, on the Eastern Mediterranean, sort of an emphasis on Lebanon, Syria, Egypt and Cyprus. We've also supported projects in regions where Honor worked, particularly Sicily and Malta. So the projects listed here on this slide relate to and build on her work in Marsala. My next few slides, they're going to talk about how the Foundation has continued Honor's legacy in this region, and also how we're marking the 50th anniversary of the Punic Ship discovery. So I'm just going to talk a bit about one particular project supported by the Foundation, which is the digital documentation of the Punic Ship. So this is the team involved. Unfortunately, as Claire said earlier, they couldn't join us on the panel tonight, but I'm hoping to provide an overview of their work and how that led to us developing some virtual content. So the aim of this project was to digitally document the ship with a high-resolution 3D laser scanner. This was in order to produce a digital archive of the remains and the associated timbers, and it's part of a conservation and management plan for the ship. So these are some images, some screenshots of the work that was undertaken. The team also laser scanned the plaster casts, which Claire mentioned, as you can see on the bottom right of the screen there. The idea was to compare the model with historical data sets in order to determine the rate of any degradation and to aid in conservation efforts. So the team combined laser scanning and photogrammetry. I think there were 98 individual laser scans and 3,500 digital photographs were taken. So these resulted in a model that was, I believe, within 2.4 millimeters accuracy. So you can see the screenshots here, and you can explore these with the links if you've got time. If not, email me and I can send you the links to those. So the models helped with things like identifying stress points in the current display cradle. It also allows specialists to look at the timbers without having to handle them and cause any damage. So the report from the team is on our website if you want to know more, specifically on the technical side about the laser scan. So don't ask me too much about that, please. So in 2020, as COVID hit and we went into lockdown, the Foundation, we started to think about how we could explore virtual exhibitions and virtual reality to engage new audiences in what we do and in maritime archaeology. So following on from the digital documentation of the Punic Ship and with the 50th anniversary approaching, we felt like this was an ideal time to tell this fascinating story in a way that would appeal to a really wide audience. So where did we start really? We began to think about what resources were available to us. So I think this is a good time to just introduce you to the remarkable Honor Frost archive. The archive's held in the Maritime Archaeology Special Collections at the University of Southampton Hartley Library. And it provides a comprehensive and a meticulously collated record of Honor Frost's archaeological work. It's excellent. There was, I think, something like 79 boxes of significant material from her projects in France, Sicily, Malta, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria and Turkey, together with material relating to her research on stone anchors. So she was really well known for her work on anchors, and photographic material recording her excavations and her travels. But most importantly, the archive has an especially complete record for the Punic Ship excavation. There's other archives now held in the special collections belonging to Sean McGrail, Lucian Bash and Nicholas Fleming. So they've now been added to the Maritime Archaeology archives. And we do plan to continue working with the special collections team to really build on these archives. So we're in the process of developing an initiative for further archives to be donated to the collection. And we do offer an annual fellowship award that offers the opportunity to visit the special collections and conduct research on a topic centred on the Honor Frost archive. So that's awarded annually, and there's I think there is information about that on our website if you're interested in the archive. So as I mentioned, the archive had a complete record of the Punic ship excavation. So how could we use this archive? This is where we began to think about developing a virtual dive. How could we demonstrate how the site might have looked 50 years ago? So the site was recorded in the early 70s. We don't have any photogrammetry or digital data, but we do have the 2D site plans, the sketches, the photos, the articles, and much more. So these are some of the images Claire showed earlier, which became really central to our virtual reconstruction. We've got the site sketch, when it showed it as the Singmaster site, the site plan, which was put together over the course of the 4 years, and the schematic section as well. And then the very comprehensive 1981 final report from Honor, and the distribution map that Claire showed. That was really useful as well, because it showed the so-called kitchen area where a lot of the organic material was found. In the publication itself, there's loads of these really beautiful drawings, so it could really help us to build a picture of what it looked like. There was also a huge number of photographs. This is just a small selection of them. So although the site was shallow and the visibility was sometimes quite poor, the quality of the images do vary, but considering the time, there's so many, and they are actually, they're so nice to look through. It's such a valuable resource to us. So what were the results? Well, we worked with Grant Cox at Artist Media to turn all these resources and this knowledge into a virtual dive. So Grant used CGI, so computer generated imagery, to recreate the seabed and the environment. We then used the resources and also the digital model from the 2018 to 2019 project to help us to recreate the timbers. So unlike many virtual dives, we didn't have a photogrammetric 3D model of the wreck site to work from. This technique wasn't used in the 70s, so we aren't trying to make an exact replica of the site. What we want to demonstrate, how it looked in an engaging way. So the site was also very shallow, so making an exact reconstruction where you can see all of the site would be impossible. So it looks deeper than it is here, but it's the only way we can sort of get it all in one place. But what we hope we have achieved is an indication of how the site looked and a way to explore the various elements of it. This is another screenshot of the virtual dive. So you can click for more information, and then on the left-hand side, you can see images and site plans in more detail. Definitely worth having a look at. As well as the wreck site itself, Grant also created a CGI model of the timbers, which can be viewed on the virtual dive as a layer on their own. And then we've since also worked with a placement student to digitize the Punic markings. So as Claire said, the ship contained a number of markings. I think over 100 painted and incised markings were discovered on the timbers. And as she said, they were carefully studied by the epigraphist, who confirmed on his idea that they related to the Phoenicio-Punic alphabet. And he determined that they'd serve to guide the Punic shipwrights in the whole construction sequence. And yeah, as Claire said, 3 rows of planking near the waterline were thought to have been pre-assembled before being added to the whole structure. So these all pointed towards a system of prefabrication that was the first ever identified in an ancient vessel. So we wanted to add these as a layer to the virtual dive. The first step was to digitize the drawings and to try and make sense of the plan. So, with so many markings of various sizes and scales, and we had this plan which was kind of hard to get our heads around, and it's almost like cutting bits out and sticking them back together in a puzzle. We had a University of Southampton placement student, Xavier. He helped with this, and we were able to eventually digitize the markings. Then what we need next is Grant to work his magic and wrap this as a layer around the CGI model. So that's actually happening at the moment. It's not ready to view yet, but watch this space. I think It won't be too long, and you can then actually zoom in and explore some of the Punic markings. It might help us to better understand them, you know, over time. So the next thing we wanted to do was explore how to reach a wider audience with this. Google Arts and Culture was what we looked at. It's an online platform of high-resolution images and videos of artworks and cultural artifacts from partner cultural organisations throughout the world. So we spoke to them about becoming a cultural institute, so we could develop a virtual exhibition to complement the virtual dive and to reach a wider audience by being on this platform. This has been done really successfully actually by the University of Malta to tell the story of the Phoenician shipwreck off Gozo as well. So the result, which was launched on the anniversary on the 7th of August, was a series of online exhibits that tell the story of the ship in an engaging way. So we used mostly photographs, as well as the site plans and sketches. We also discovered an interview that Honor gave with Radio 4 in 1993, and we were able to include clips from this. So here's an example of when she describes finding the cannabis. It was so nice to hear Honor talking about the ship. So wherever we could, we added audio to the virtual exhibition.
The wreck took 4 years to excavate. And on the first year, I saw among the food a great many little yellow, what looked like stems of grass. And so I picked them up and put them into little plastic containers and took them back with the samples to Kew. But we were getting so many samples of plants that Kew simply did what they could, and a lot didn't get analysed. And so on the second or third year, I was determined. I found a basket of these things, and the identification came out as cannabis sativa.
So they've been chewing pot?
Chewing it, because you see, the best pot is made from the upper leaves and the small leaves and pollen. But they may have made tea out of it, it's quite possible, out of the lower part that doesn't have so much drug in it.
And do you think that kept them going as they were rowing?
Oh, yes.
I love how knowledgeable Honor was about cannabis. So that sort of leads me on to my final slide. So also with all of this, we decided to make a podcast series, if you haven't heard about it. So again, with COVID, we wanted to explore ways to engage with wider audiences. So yeah, we decided to make a podcast. It's called Dive and Dig. It features a lot of the 1993 interview with Honor, as well as extracts from her book, The 1963 Under the Mediterranean. We talk about the Punic Ship as part of this, as well as lots of other really amazing projects. So it's definitely worth a listen. The idea really was to sort of explore the development of maritime archaeology, comparing the techniques used by Honor in the 70s with how the discipline is today. So particularly looking at groundbreaking projects like the Phoenician wreck off Gozo being excavated in 110 meters of water. So despite how much the field has advanced technologically, the podcast also helped us to highlight how often ahead of her time Honor was. She organised the mini museum using the Punic Ship plaster cast in the 70s, and she visited a local school. She worked closely with the local community. This was reflected when she became, I think it was an honorary citizen of Marsala. This, I'll just play quickly as an animation. It was created for the podcast. It will just give you a little taste of some of the content. Here we go.
When you're young, you read tintin books and you see pictures of shipwrecks and stuff like that. And then you grow up and you think, well, yeah, obviously shipwrecks aren't bad at all. Actually, they could be better.
Welcome to Dive and Dig, the podcast
that
takes you on a remarkable underwater journey.
For each time period, you see this history unveiling itself.
So it's about putting those pieces of the puzzle together to build up a more complex picture.
We have a fragmentary set of remains that relate to a once organised and functioning machine. That's what we're trying to get back to understanding.
Timmy Gambin and his team from the University of Malta are now diving on a shipwreck that's 110 metres deep.
which is slightly crazy. Join us on Dive and Dig, a podcast made by the Honor Frost Foundation.
There you go. So that was a bit of a shameless plug for our podcast a bit there, but it does include some really nice archive material of Honor and talking about the Punic ship as well. And like I said, how she was really ahead of her time. So it's been a really interesting year leading up to the anniversary, working on the virtual exhibition and the virtual dive, looking at ways that we can tell this story in engaging ways with different media, and using this archive material, because there's so much, and there's still actually more. Because of COVID, we couldn't physically go to the archive, so there is actually more that we can do with this. And as I said, like the Punic markings as well, once they're digitized and added as a layer, I think that'd be really, really interesting. So definitely watch this space. I'm going to pass you back to Claire now. She's just going to talk quickly before we finish about a project relating to the ship, which is happening now, and then we'll go to questions, I guess. So back to you, Claire.
Thank you, Lauren. I've given Claire the screen. Claire, if you just want to unmute yourself. Let's see if I can unmute you. I've unmuted you, Claire. There you go. You're free to talk.
Thank you, my savior. Yes, so I'm so sorry I ran over time with my part of the presentation. So this is, I'll try to be quick, but part of the beauty of the archives that the Honor Frost Foundation have made available to us is that you can make discoveries. And what happened some years ago is that with my colleague Elena Flavia Castagnino Berlinghieri, we were investigating aspects about the history of the project. We went to Marsala and spoke to people there. And when we went to look in the archives, we found something quite extraordinary. We found, oh, let's see if I can go forward. Pardon me. I'm not sure why I'm not going forward.
If you just put your mouse down in the bottom left-hand side of the PowerPoint, you should just have the arrows appear.
Yes, but there is a moment of drama here.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, here we go. So we found a manuscript that was written by Honor Frost. It was a book. It was intended to be a book that told the story of her arriving in Sicily and getting involved with this ship excavation project, her relationships with the people of Marsala, the whole context of the story. Not a scientific book, but instead a popular book, very much like her first book, Under the Mediterranean, which came out in 1963. So this gives you, this quote is the very first sentence where she indicates she's going to talk about this vessel as a phoenix, something that's reborn, not from flames, but from the sea. And she's a brilliant writer. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this discovery came about. Here's an example, here's an image of the binder. It just said Phoenix on it. I pulled it out of a box, opened it up, and started to look. And I said to Elena Flavia, oh my Lord, this is a book. I don't know anything about this book. What could it possibly be? Called The Second Life of a Phoenix, and the word Phoenix is related to Phoenician etymologically. Sketches, notes, in this book, in this box, including the binder, corrected proofs, examples of illustrations to be used, chapter epitaphs, as well as lots and lots of background notes for the different chapters, writing about the Egadi Sea battle, writing about other Phoenician finds in Western waters, writing about the whole issue of what that sister ship prow was all about, the cutwater or ram, long discussions. So what we found were 7 chapters that were essentially finished, and then notes for several more unfinished chapters. And the work that we're doing now is trying to reconstruct not to rewrite, but just to get a sense of what those chapters might have included, what they might have covered, sort of the chronology of her writing process itself. There's also material in the archives of letters to publishers starting in the early 80s. One of the questions is, when was she writing this? When did she start the project? Much to do with what was going on with the ship project itself. So here's just to get you a sense very quickly. Don't try to read because I don't think you can, but to give you a sense of the editing, I've edited the English. Usually it was pretty straightforward. Every once in a while there's a paragraph that's mind-boggling, but preparing the finished chapters for publication. The other aspect that's just wonderful is that Honor Frost intended this to be translated into Italian. She had one chapter already translated by the sister of a friend. And so she was presenting this as a possible option to publishers. We think, again, early 80s. What we ended up doing is we ended up translating the text completely from the beginning, and it will be presented in a bilingual version. So hold on one second. Yes, okay. So I just put this up because to remind us of the kinds of topics that were covered, that she covers in this book. If we go back actually to this, the chapters, the first chapters that are written take us to the end of 1973. In other words, the Punic ship has been found. They're beginning to take the ribs, the frames up. But within these chapters, she covers all sorts of topics: what we know about ancient shipbuilding, coastal geomorphology of the region, traditional English connections to the area, even connected to the wine industry, with which she had connections because it was, Alagna from the Cantine Pellegrino that helped her on practical terms with facilities to conserve the ship timbers. And also as a chemist, he understood the aspects of conservation. So there's this interesting connection to the wine industry there. She also writes about being an archaeologist and the process of discovery. And she writes about mistakes. She writes, it's wonderfully written. I'm trying not to be biased, but I am. And we are aiming to get this available within the next few months, next year, likely. There have been some COVID provoked issues with the finishing of publishing this, but that is the intention. So let's see, I was going back to this image. Here's a picture of the Alagna family. It really gives this book a flavor of what it was like to be on the project, but what it's like to be an archaeologist coming across this kind of new material. What are the ways that one can follow one hypothesis, discard it, pick it up again? What resources do you use? It's very, I think anyway, incredibly interesting. So the last slide, this should be second to the last. When I mentioned the issue of the chronology of Honor's writing, it really, the first decade of work, she had control over the excavation and conservation of the vessel. And by 1978, the vessel was placed in a building, which I mentioned earlier. But you see, there were difficulties with how the vessel, how it was possible to take care of this unique artifact. And in a sense, you can see how the writing that she started and then stopped and started again, and in some ways parallels her struggles with getting this vessel to the public in the best way possible. Here you see in 1980, the vessel was visible through a small screen in this tent. By 2006, let's see, this is earlier than 2016. No, this is some years later, by I think it was 1999, that's right, I'm looking at my notes, the building had been completely restored. and provided with climate control. And so now what we have is a beautifully presented exhibit, which really solves a lot of the questions and issues that had plagued this ship artifact for a good number of years. And so the book itself, we don't have a cover quite yet, but I just thought it was fun to look at some of the books that Honor has written. Well, she had a career, I didn't mention, but she had a career before she came in her early 40s to archaeology. She was an illustrator and involved in ballet and poetry. And here is her first book that was published in 1948. 1963, this is the American edition of her book Under the Mediterranean, which also is a travelogue, but also explains the process of archaeology that was being learned at that time on shipwreck sites and coastal harbor sites and anchors back then. So here we have, with the support of Sidestone Press, the expectation that we will have Honor's third book, what she has written, and then the work that Elena Flavia and I have done to reconstruct what the remaining chapters might have been in general terms, and also our analyses and commentary on what this book signifies, what the entire project means for the history of the discipline of maritime archaeology. So here is a selected list of selected bibliography of articles that Honor wrote. The main one is the main publication is a book, yes, but she co-wrote it. Lilybaeum, the Punic Ship. This is the final excavation report. A lot of the information about the Punic Ship is contained also in these earlier regular reports. She was meticulous. This is another thing that distinguishes Honor in terms of being. She's a very good writer, but she was also a very good scientist and a responsible scientist, because she published regularly, not only in science science publications, but also popular press. So you have Lilybaeum and some other articles that provide the scientific, let's say, background to aspects of the project. And now we may have this other book, The Second Life of a Phoenix, which will show the humanistic, cultural side of what it meant for her to be an archaeologist working in Western Sicily in the 70s and 80s. So thank you very much. Here are some links that Lauren has organized for people who want to know more information. And we can open this up to questions, I guess.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. If yourself and Lauren, if you want to put your webcams on to prove that you are with us live this evening. Where are you joining us from, Claire? What time is it where you are?
It is 3:10. I'm so sorry. It's my fault we went over, because I'm a bit of a chatterbox. Am I there?
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, good. Hello.
Hello. Well, thank you very much. That was fascinating. We had a conversation a couple of days ago, and I didn't know very much about it at all, being only born in 1975. But it's been great to go through the podcasts and then to hear your presentations. We've got a couple of questions, and hopefully a few more will trickle in before we run out of time. I wanted, can you remind? I may have missed. How shallow was it? I mean, in what depth of water?
Well, it was actually quite shallow. It varied between 2.5 to 1.5 meters. Sometimes sand shifted, so it would become a little shallower. But if you remember, I don't know if I'm capable of going back to an image. There was an image where you could see somebody on the sea bottom with an airlift, and there were two people floating above. Honor describes how in certain circumstances and certain weather and certain sandbank movements, she could practically stand with her head, just under the water. And so what this means, you think, oh, a shallow wreck, it makes it easier. Not at all. It means the site is much more susceptible to currents, to weather patterns and so on. And as Lauren mentioned, problems of visibility, which make photography difficult. So yes, so shallow. Yes.
Yeah, she
Absolutely.
mentioned in the 1993 interview, she mentioned how unpleasant it was actually diving in that. And I think she even said that the site had become her Moby Dick, I think, because it just kept disappearing beneath the sand. And each time she went back, they had to remove so much sand before they could find it again. And obviously, yeah, so shallow, sort of churning things up. So must be tricky.
So what's astonishing in that depth of water with that much sand movement is that there was anything there at all.
No, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
in a
let
sense,
alone all that. Sorry, Claire.
I was just going to say that the virtue of the sand is that it preserved the materials phenomenally. No oxygen and no light means that organic materials get preserved. So that's phenomenal. But
certainly,
sorry.
They were experiencing movement of sand in the really, in the small space of time, year upon year, or presumably month after month. So if that happens since 241 BC, it's amazing that anything survived.
Yeah.
Right.
We have a question from Alistair. I think we may have had the answer. I think you may have referred to it, Lauren. An understanding of the purpose of the shipwright letters. The designation of longitudinal strakes would normally be referred to as A, B, C strake, starting from the keel outwards. I don't know if Alistair Hart is a shipwright. Who asked the question. I don't know who's this for in terms of the letters. Lauren, you said it may have served as a guide to the shipwrights in the hull construction sequence.
Yeah, that was what the epigraphist sort of concluded, was that it's basically saying, put this nail here and this tenon is to be carved here and so on, like that, as like a guideline to help with how quickly they could construct the ship, and then also with this idea that it was sort of prefabricated. So that's what we think. I think once the there's a full report on this in her final publication, but also I think once the markings can be digitized and put onto the plan, if Alistair is more knowledgeable about these things, we can then study them, and you can zoom in and move around and get a better idea of them. So I think there's still lots open to discussion on it, but I think that's the main idea, was that it was to guide the shipwrights. Yeah.
Yes, in fact, at one point I think Johnston made a particular study of the fact that one Punic sign, Phoenicio-Punic sign, wow, was always found where nails were found. And so he published a paper saying, I have identified a Phoenician word, nail. So, there gives an idea of the ramifications of this shipwreck and studies of details on the shipwreck, even beyond maritime archaeology.
Alistair again asked another question. Does anyone have any sense of the location of the shipyards and any details of them that may have built it?
I'll answer that. Well, one of the ways that Anna was trying to figure out, if possible, where the vessel was built. Was it related to the Carthaginian world, North Africa, and Western Sicily, or was it more connected to the Roman world, the Italian continent? Was trying to look at the ship timbers and where the distribution of that the different kinds of wood. Also, she looked at the organic materials, and there was I've actually read the opposite thing. A certain fern is either, in one publication it's endemic to North Africa, the other it isn't. But anyway, the kind of detail to say, well, where was this? Since the vessel, I don't know that I emphasize this clearly enough, but the evidence shows that the vessel was new when it sank, very, very new. The ship shavings of the wood, the fact that the putty was imprinted with leaves, so on. So you think, oh, well, if it's that new, then maybe we can identify where exactly the vessel was originally built. The fact that the markings, the shipwrights markings, are Phoenicio-Punic, that would suggest it must have been built in the Carthaginian part of the central Mediterranean. But there are people who say, well, maybe the shipwrights moved, or ships moved, shipwrights moved, maybe. So in this, I mean, there is evidence, for instance, at Carthage for ship sheds where vessels were naval vessels were maintained. But the question of where the vessels were actually built, I think Honor actually wrote an article exploring that. I don't recall exactly what she said, but it's a good question. But it has to do. The question relates to when people say, well, what was the nationality of the ship? Who built it? You know, where was it working? In this case, we know that there's some kind of a Carthaginian Phoenician connection, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly where. Also, another aspect is the ballast stones, because presumably you pick up ballast stones from near where you're building the vessel. You're not going to import ballast stones; they can be mixed. So to try to identify the origin, the petrographic through petrographic analyses where the ballast stones come, that could be useful. And initially, they thought some of the ballast stones were from Pantelleria, which is an island in the Sicilian Channel. But now some of the ballast stones seem to be instead from the central Italian coast. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means maybe some of the ballast had been left off at a location by a previous vessel, and then another vessel came along and said, "Oh, great ballast stone! I'm going to put this in my house." So it's tricky. It's tricky. I don't know if I hopefully answered that question.
Well, you preempted my question about the ballast, because you tentatively told us there was provenance sort of evidence with regards to the ballast, but you didn't actually refer to what that was. So I was going to ask about that. But I suppose with ballast is particularly with a merchant ship moving goods, you will take on and take off ballast in harbour or in port, wherever you're going, depending on what cargo you're taking on. So actually, although you start off with a certain amount of ballast from one location, eventually, presumably, you're going to get ballast from all sorts of different ports and all sorts of different quarries.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. There's lots of the list, the bibliographical list there is only Honor Frost writings, and there's a lot more other articles she wrote, but there's a lot of discussion about this vessel. It's not clear cut exactly where it was built, where it was from. It's just that the features that I tried to illustrate are what we know. What we know is this. How you interpret that. In fact, Honor writes at the end of the introduction of Lilybaeum, the final report, says, "I am now presenting these not preliminary, I had it written down, but she says, I'm presenting to the public and to the scientific community what we achieved in our fieldwork and some of our initial hypotheses. Now it's up to you to visit the ship, because at that time the vessel finally was on display, even though not so easily accessible, but let's open this up to discussion." And again, that's what she says and writes. And it's a small world, maritime archaeology. So opinions get pretty heated nonetheless.
The question from Lucy Simon, actually, over in Lebanon, was a re-identification of timbers used done recently?
No, it wasn't. As far as pardon me. What I presented was to do with the identification that Honor published. I don't know if there's been more recent studies. I don't know. Good question.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. No. Most of the recent stuff, the 2018 to 19 work really focused on sort of preparing a conservation strategy. So I don't think there's been anything done recently. There's definitely scope for more.
I was going to ask about the podcast, Lauren, and your experience of making it, publishing it, releasing it, and the how many people have listened?
Well, that's actually really hard to tell, apparently, but the feedback so far has been really positive. It's been a real learning curve for us at the foundation, but it's also been really interesting because we were able to talk to, I think we interviewed 22 people over the course of the 5 episodes. People like John Adams from Southampton, and then also our colleagues, but also people working in Tanzania and in Australia and all that kind of thing. So people from all around the world. So that was really cool. But then trying to fit so much content into sort of 5 half-hour episodes was quite a challenge, trying to think about what sort of messages that we wanted to get across. So, you know, hopefully we can build on it. It has been popular. It's been several thousand people have listened to it at least, we think, but it's quite hard to get the analytics down. So if you haven't listened to it, all 5 episodes, episode 5 is my favorite because it sort of builds up and then it kind of rounds everything up in a really nice way where we really reflect on like where maritime archaeology is now and what challenges we're facing, and also some amazing projects that are starting to tackle some of these challenges from sort of climate change and things like that. So yeah, I think that's my favorite episode, episode 5.
Was it a conscious decision to limit it to 5?
No, not well. I think it was just kind of a can't remember how we got to 5. I think it was just to see how it would go to begin with, really, and then we were going to see where we could take it from there. But the sort of the main themes that we wanted to cover, we felt like we could do that in 5. I mean, we could go on. There's so many things we could cover in so many of those interviews that you know, we had to choose certain bits of it to include. So there's lots of other material actually that we could make more podcasts out of. So yeah, definitely, I think there's scope to make more when we've had some time to breath.
There's the comedy outtakes version as well.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, definitely.
And the Google Arts and Culture thing as well. I mean, that's, I think, great to be included by Google as a, you know, accepted or registered.
Yeah, they've been really supportive as well, actually. So throughout it, so to begin with, when we were putting, so it was me and Claire and Lucy Blue who were putting together the exhibition, and we put it together as like one exhibition, and Google were quite blunt. They were like, no one is going to sit and read through one entire thing in one go. So they, it seemed kind of brutal, but they were very honest because they know what people's attention span is, and they know what interests people. So they helped us to break it down into 5 separate but linked stories, sort of telling the story as it went on, and they sort of helped guide us in that, and then helped us to promote it as well, which has been, you know, obviously they've got a lot of followers and lots of people. So and also in that whole process, exploring the other stuff that's on the Google Arts and Culture platform, I would recommend doing, because well, not just the Gozo, the University of Malta stuff that's on there that's really cool, but there's loads of other things on there that I discovered as I was trying to see how other people's exhibitions were put together. So it's a good platform, I think.
Has that come out of museums being closed due to COVID restrictions?
I think it's grown. I mean, it started before that, but I think a lot of it has grown. So Google have this, they can now go, and you know, like Street View, so you can go along and see outside. They've gone through museums now and done a street view inside, so you can go through and explore in a museum virtual. I did it actually during lockdown with my daughter for the Natural History Museum, and was showing her some of the exhibits, and she was really amazed by it. And it doesn't beat going there in person, but I think during COVID it became a really popular resort, and that was kind of one of our drivers as well, was to use these sorts of platforms to engage people virtually, you know.
And I suppose with all the very busiest of museums, you don't have to worry about all the other people ruining the view.
No, can't go to the cafe though.
Okay, Lucy Smuld's just come back and said, yes, please do re-identify. Pine keels are quite peculiar.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah. See, it seems not strong enough. Not hardwood.
Yeah, absolutely, quite a softwood is. Okay, well, I think we are out of time. We don't have any other questions from our lovely audience. So thank you so much, folks. I'm going to just quickly share a screen to show next month's presentation, and then I'll kind of do a little winding up. So if I just still show my screen, work out which one to show. Ooh, which one am I showing? Am I showing any yet? I don't know. Which one are we seeing? Oh, no, it's the wrong one. Just let me swap displays. Or actually, I'm just going to end that and just change the other screen. There you go, telling you all how to do it, and then I did it wrong myself. Then we're going to show this one. Okie dokie. So thank you ever so much to Claire and to Lauren, and thank you for attending and for submitting your questions. We will be posting a recording of today's webinar on our NES YouTube channel in due course, just bear with us, where you can also find the other recordings from the other webinars in this series. As I say, we are on number 8 now in 12, where we'll be finishing in December. On the same YouTube channel, you'll also find our IJNA webinar series and the 20 talks that we did in 2020 as part of our weekly COVID talks. Next month, if I press the right button, next month we shall be hearing from Dr. Brad Duncan, who is a maritime archaeologist with a specialist services team in Heritage New South Wales in Australia. So goodness knows what time it'll be for him when he has to present. He's going to be doing a presentation called Highways to the Interior, Riverine Cultural Landscapes Investigating the Archaeology and Social History of Australia's River Systems, which I hadn't even contemplated as a topic before it was offered. So thank you to Brad. We'll hear from him on the 22nd of September. So on behalf of our speakers, Claire and Lauren, thank you ever so much. Thank you to our sponsors, the Honor Frost Foundation, and thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.